This is more Doug DeMuro, and today I'm going to tell you all of the cars that are in my dream car garage, all of the cars that I want the most. I get this question a lot, so today I'm going to talk about it. All right, before I go through the list of cars in my dream garage, a couple of things to note. First off, this is not like my all-time dream car list, all the cars I want. I wanted to be kind of realistic about this. What are the cars that maybe I could one day potentially actually own? I mean, obviously I want a Ferrari F50, but those are $3 million. I'm never gonna have that kind of money to buy a car, LaFerrari, any of that stuff. So I wanted to focus only on the cars that I really wanted the very most, more than anything else. So this is like my most focused list. I actually spent the last month kind of tooling this list and retooling it and shaping it and changing it and adjusting it. And so I feel like it is finally in its perfect form. One other item worth noting, if you're interested in what cars I've owned before, I actually made a video about that once, all of the cars that I've owned in my car history, if you kind of want to see where my car wanting opinions are going. And I will link that video in the description below, and you can check out all of the cars I've had in the past. Okay, so there are 11 cars on my absolute certain list. Then there are 2 daily driver cars, and then there are 7 cars on my probably want list. But that would only be if I got a large enough garage. So we start with the absolutely certain list. This is alphabetical, not in order of want. All right, number 1, the Audi RS2 Avant. In the mid-1990s, Audi wanted to make a high-performance version of their smaller station wagon, and they had Porsche build it for them, just like the Mercedes 500e I recently reviewed on my main channel. Unlike the 500e though, the RS2 has Porsche badges all over it. In the actual badge, it has Porsche wheels, Porsche mirrors, Porsche turn signals. It's this weird hybrid combination of Porsche and Audi. It does have an Audi powertrain. These cars were only built for a little over a year and a half. Very hard to find. They're just becoming legal to import to North America. And I really want an RS2 Avant. This is the car in my mind that really launched the fast wagon craze. It was basically the first high performance wagon, and all since then have kind of blossomed from the RS2. And to me, it's also one of the seminal older Audis. And as Audi becomes a more desirable brand, I think some of these older cars are going to become more valuable, more special, more sought after. And I'd like to get in on the RS2 before that happens. All right, next car on my list, number 2, the E30 Bmw M3. This is the only BMW on my list. I was obsessed with the BMW 1 Series M for years. But then I drove the M2 competition, and it was just better than the 1M. And I realized that BMW is still fine-tuning this. There's still better to come. But I think it's hard to fine-tune the E30 M3. It's a fantastic car. The driving experience is amazing, really unbelievable. I love how it looks. I love the 80s design. I love the flared fenders. It is really one of the coolest cars. All right, number 3, again, this is alphabetical. Number 3, Ferrari F40. This is the most expensive car on this list and the least likely for me to actually get, but I just love the F40. I like a lot of Ferraris. But in years past, I never really had one that stood out as a car that I absolutely, obsessively, really deeply want. But in the last few years, ever since I drove an F40, about 2.5 years ago to film a video with, it's kind of started to bubble up in my mind, maybe this is the Ferrari. And I've kind of come to view it as the standout Ferrari, the one that I really want. And unlike the insane Ferraris, like the Enzo and the LaFerrari, those are all 3 million plus. It's a never gonna happen car. And even if it did, you wouldn't drive it. They're not realistic. The F40s are still going around $1 million. That also is not realistic. I could never imagine spending $1 million on an automobile. But if there was one you were gonna, it'd be the F40. I mean, it needs no explanation. One of the most special Ferraris ever made. Enzo's last sports car, the design, the performance, it's an incredibly, unbelievably special car. Next car on my list, 2005, 2006 Ford GT. And I'm happy to say that I have one, which goes back to my point earlier. I'm now starting to kind of go after these cars that I really want to have more long term. I would prefer to have this car in the heritage color scheme, and in the world where I'm dreaming of my dream garage, it would be a heritage car, the Gulf colors. But I'm not complaining. This car is awesome and I absolutely love having it and I love driving it. I don't use it as much as I should. I really think that this was one of the most special cars from a very special era in the mid 2000s, that 04, 05, 06 era. A lot of special cars came out then, and to me this is one of them. All right, next car on my list, the Lancia Delta Integrale Evoluzione. I love this car. I always kind of liked it, and then I filmed a video with one last year and I really love it. At the end of the video I actually approached the owner and I said, would you consider selling it? And they pop up here and there. A couple problems. One is I can't really find anyone who's skilled enough to want to take on the ability to maintain this car. I've actually reached out to some local mechanics who I trust and they're all like, yeah, I mean, maybe if you had one, I guess I would work on it. But it's a bit of a challenge. They were never sold here. This is the high-strung performance version. But these are really special cars in much the same way that the E30 M3 is a special car. You have the flared fenders, you have sort of the normal car that becomes crazy with the extra performance. When I drove this car, I was enamored with the steering feel, the small size, how tossable it was and how tossable it felt. And I'm really, really into this car. Next up, my next dream garage car, 1997 Land Rover Defender 90. And again, I'm fortunate enough to have one of those as well. I have wanted this car ever since I was a kid. I remember thinking how cool it would be to have a car like this. My family didn't have the kind of money to get a toy Land Rover, but I remember seeing them around town when I grew up in Denver, and I remember occasionally you'd see one and that's so cool, but it wasn't a realistic thing. And it was, as you probably know, basically the first car I really got for myself when my YouTube channel kind of started taking off. And I really love my Defender so much. And I would only want a convertible, a soft top version like the one I have, and I would only want it in yellow, which is the color I have. All right, next car on my dream list. Mercedes, this is a very obscure one. Mercedes-Benz C63 Amg Wagon. Not the new one, but the one they made in the late 90s, 1998 to 2001. They sold in the States a C43 sedan. So this was that body of C-Class, but with a 4.3 liter V8. The wagon was only sold in Europe and maybe other markets. It's incredibly rare and kind of ridiculous, but I really want one. I had a Mercedes E55 from this era that I loved. I loved the simplicity, the big, naturally aspirated motor. I loved the look. And the C43 to me is a better version of that, smaller, more exciting. I'm told that you can just bolt up the motor from the E55 into the C43. Like, it's a very simple swap, and a lot of people do it. So that's what I would do. I would get the C43 wagon and I would put in the E55 powertrain. I'm a few years away from this. This car came out in 98, so it has to be 25 years old before it can come to the States. It's got a couple more years before I can import one. But these are not that expensive in Europe, and I would love to bring one over pretty much as soon as I can get one here legally. All right, next car on my dream car list, Mercedes-Benz CLK 63 AMG Black Series. I love this car. This car is rowdy and it's ridiculous. It gets sideways in an instant. It is not my usual type of car, but I drove one for a video maybe 2 years ago and I was enamored. I loved it. Every minute of it, I absolutely loved it. Tons of fun, naturally aspirated V8. I love the look, the touring car styling. In fact, flared fenders is kind of a theme, as you may have realized in some of these cars. And I find that to be one of the great Mercedes-Benz and modern performance cars. Next up, another car I have on my dream car list, Mercedes-Benz G500 Cabriolet. Believe it or not, this is a car I've always wanted. I have one. I love this thing. It is a great car. I like it even more now that I have it than I did when I wanted it, which is not what usually happens. Usually I really want something, I buy it, and then it doesn't live up to my expectations. The G-Cab actually has exceeded them. It's amazingly smooth compared to my Defender. I love being able to put the top up or down easily. Fantastic car, as bizarre as it looks. And I've done 2,400 miles in mine in just 3 months, which is crazy because I don't have a commute. I'm driving it everywhere. All right, next car on my list is the Porsche 993 Turbo. I do not consider myself to be a Porsche guy, and I'm actually kind of tired of the whole Porsche community, and you get them together and they just want to talk about their deviated stitching. Oh, look at this dashboard stitching was only made for 2 model years. Who cares? But I have to admit, Porsche has made some great cars, and I think the greatest 911 of all time was the 993 Turbo. It is a small feeling car, very tossable, very exciting. I love the look of them. Probably the most beautiful Porsche of all time. And I know that kind of feeds into the hype because these last of the air cooled 911s have a lot of hype behind them, but I've driven all of these Porsches and I can confidently say that for me, the 993 Turbo is absolutely the one that I would want above all the others. These are expensive. These are selling now for like $120,000 to $140,000, although the market has clearly started to soften a little bit on Porsches, thankfully and finally. I would only want one in Arena Red, which was the press color in probably Porsche's most famous ad of all time, the Kills Bugs Fast ad. And finally, the last car on my ultimate car list of 11, that would be the Porsche Carrera GT. This is no surprise if you've watched any of my videos before about this car. I am obsessed. I feel that this is the greatest car ever built. Certainly the greatest combustion engine car, and I really believe that all the other combustion engine cars were sort of leading up to the Carrera GT, and it was the pinnacle, and now things are different and there's hybrids and that sort of thing, which I don't mind, but that car with the manual transmission and the lack of driver aids and assistance, and the V10, the sound is unreal, the styling, the look, honestly, its history, its backstory with how dangerous it is, truly believe it is the greatest car ever manufactured, and I want one deeply. Now, unfortunately, these are like $700,000 to $800,000, and I would want one in yellow, and that's more like $900,000 or $1 million. Not realistic. I'm not going to get one. Maybe one day, if I sell everything else and live to be 80. But it's such a cool car. It's my great sadness that I can't have one. You know, in 2009, they were selling for $250,000. But I was in college in 2009 and it wasn't likely. And now they're selling for $750,000 and it's just as unlikely. And I've kind of watched the Carrera GT stay a little bit ahead of me my whole life. And I've wanted this car for 15 years, ever since I saw one in February of 2005. And I hope that one day I'm able to get one, but I think it's very unlikely. But nonetheless, it deserves a spot on my car list. Now, I also mentioned that in addition to my 11 dream car list, there's 2 daily drivers I want. These also will probably be obvious if you've watched a lot of my videos. One, Mercedes-Benz E63 Amg Wagon, the new body style. I consider this to be probably the best all-round car on the market, maybe ever. It feels like a sports car. It hauls like an SUV. It has the technology of an ultra-electric car, amazing vehicle. I have an older version of this car as my daily driver. I would love the newer version, but they're too expensive. New ones are like 120, 130,000. Used ones are still in the 90s, and I can't afford that kind of depreciation hit. But I love that car, and I would love to have one. My other dream daily driver would be a Toyota Land Cruiser from the 200 series from 2013 and up. So either this one, which was sold from 13 to 15, or this one, which was a facelift in 2016. I'd be fine with either. I love this car. I think it is amazing, the idea of having a car for 25 years or 30 years or your whole life and never replacing it. It's what I want. Unfortunately, my problems with the Land Cruiser are, number one, it doesn't have full speed adaptive cruise control, so it won't come to a stop in bumper to bumper traffic. And I won't drive another daily driver car that doesn't have that. I'm often sitting in bumper to bumper traffic when I'm filming videos far away, and I need the car to kind of speed up and slow down for me because it's just not something I constantly want to do. I'm on the road for hours sometimes. The other problem with the Land Cruiser to me is it's just inefficient. Even if it had the full speed cruise control, it's hard to justify a 5.7 liter V8 in today's modern world. That thing gets like 13 miles per gallon. Now, the upside of that is that motor is tremendously durable, really reliable, known to be one of the most reliable motors on the market. So it's kind of a trade-off you have to just deal with if you want one of those. But that would be a fantastic daily driver car. Now, I also mentioned that there is a list of 7 maybe cars. These don't deserve a spot in the yes, I absolutely want one and need one dream garage, but they're close. They're cars that I would get if I had maybe 12 garage spaces or 13. And I'll go through them quickly. Number one, early Acura NSX. I've really started to come into liking these. I think they're aging very well. They're starting to look really beautiful and classic and cool. I think an early 90s one in red, either with a T-top or the black roof that they had, I think would be super cool. I really like that car, especially unmodified, untouched, just in its pure, simple form. Next up, the Bugatti Chiron. This is not a realistic car. These cost multi-millions of dollars, and I disqualified other cars earlier for that exact thing. So this doesn't really deserve a spot, but I just love it. I think it's an amazing car. Growing up when I did, you know, the Veyron was the ultimate car. It was the fastest, the first car, $1 million. It was so weird and insane, and everybody knew all the numbers, and the Chiron is just sort of a better evolution of that. Next up, the Lamborghini 350 GT. I consider this to be the most beautiful car ever built. I'm not a big fan of vintage cars. I'm not really into how 60s cars drive. But I really, truly believe this is the most beautiful car ever. And so if I had a giant warehouse, this would be in it, probably just to look at and appreciate how gorgeous it is. Next up, the Lamborghini Diablo SE30. These were the 30th anniversary Diablos. They were made in a few colors, but purple is the one I would get it in. And I always thought this was sort of the ultimate version of the Diablo. And to me, the Diablo was the last really insane Lamborghini before Audi took over and made all the cars better, but not quite as ridiculous. I consider this to be the most aggressively styled car ever built. It's just insane looking, and I would love to have one of these and probably not use it all that much because Diablos are hell to drive, but it'd be cool. Next up, Lamborghini Lm002. These are awesome, very cool. Doesn't make my ultimate list because I'm just not interested in driving it all that much, but I think having an Lm002 would be pretty cool. Just a ridiculous period in Lambo's history. Next up, the Nissan Skyline Gtr R34. I love the R34 GTR, and I will say this would be on my definitely list if it was left-hand drive. But because it's a right-hand drive car only, it's just kind of a disaster to actually use, and I really want to be able to use all of these cars. It deserves a spot on my maybe list for that reason, because I think it's a great car. I grew up playing Gran Turismo and idolizing this car like everybody else. And when I actually drove one for a video like 2 years ago, it was just as good as I was hoping it would be, which was so cool. And to me, it's still an ultimate car. It also has flared fenders compared to a regular Skyline, and I would just want one in that Bayside blue with no modifications, the stock wheels. To me, one of the best Japanese cars ever built. And finally, the last car on my maybe list is the Toyota Mega Cruiser. That's this thing. A lot of people don't know this exists, but basically it is a Japanese version of the Humvee. They made them for military uses, but just like the Humvee, they also made a few for civilians. So you can get one. It is essentially like a Hummer, except, you know, it's a Toyota, and it's weird, and I like weird, and so I'm into this. It has a 4.1 liter turbo diesel 4-cylinder engine, which is ridiculous. And it also has rear wheel steering. I would love to have this car. They're tremendously expensive in Japan. You can import one now to the States. They're 25 years old. They came out like 1990, like the Hummer, around that era. And you can get one in, but it's huge and nobody would want it. And I have no interest in trying to find someone who would work on this motor that was only really used in like Toyota buses and then also this, but it's cool. And they're really expensive. The civilian ones sell for like $90,000 to $100,000. It's ridiculous. There's a very small market for that thing. But if I had a crazy warehouse, the Mega Cruiser would be in it because it's just like the ultimate for a guy who likes Land Cruisers and 4Runners and you know, Toyota trucks, which I do. The Mega Cruiser is like the mega Toyota truck, and I think it's awesome. So that's my dream car list. I do get asked a lot, you know, what are the dream cars? A couple of interesting things about this list. One thing I noticed when I was compiling it, there's a lot of German cars on this list. If my dream list, you have 3 Mercedes, 2 Porsche, an Audi, and a BMW. There's not that many American cars. In fact, there's just one, and it's this. Now, I find that to be kind of weird because I've owned quite a few American cars myself. I had a Cadillac CTS-V, I had a Cadillac CTS-V Wagon, I had a Hummer, I had a Viper, and I think the truth is there's a lot of American cars I really like, but there are very few that I absolutely love enough that I would want to include in my crazy all-time dream garage. You also get a pretty good variety on my list here. It's a good mix, which is something I've always had with my cars, a good mix. I've had many different cars from many different brands over the years, and one of the things that I'm most proud of when I make my videos is that very few people accuse me of bias towards or against automakers, because I think it's pretty clear that I just like a lot of different cars. And this list reflects that. Not too many people have on their dream car list a slow old Land Rover and also a Carrera GT and also a Toyota Land Cruiser and a Mega Cruiser and et cetera, et cetera. But I like weird stuff and I like varied stuff, and that really comes through in my car list.